and who were trying to find some way to generate some income within their local communities. And they were very, very keen on whatever kind of collective arrangements there were, even those provided by their housing provider, of whom they were very suspicious, and the enterprise club that the local authority and the housing associations were running. And the people that we interviewed, or who were happy to be interviewed, were people who had got quite involved in this endeavor. So if I'll just take a few minutes to tell you about them and the project. It started with an open space meeting, which you probably know is a form of meeting which is intended to facilitate as much participation as possible and no lecturing at. And part of it was this first picture on my left. Frances is actually the lady in the middle on the back. But one of the things she did was, there were 4 or 5 different events, and one of them was an opportunity for people to work with paper models to think about how they would redesign their flats if they were to try and build up their scheme to work at home. And so this is 2 of the participants working around their own flat. It was quite interesting. I did my own study and my own mess at home, and it was quite academic mess. It was quite interesting. We interviewed 13 people in the end, 10 women and 3 men, 70% BME, and typical of residents in local social housing in that part of London. 23% identified as gay or lesbian, whether that's typical, who could say, but I think it was typical of the people who who persisted in participating in this enterprise club, which was fairly dramatically biased towards people who lived on their own. It was quite interesting that people that were embedded in a family and a couple found it really difficult to get out to these events on a Saturday, especially if they had small children. So that over time tended to be more of a bias for women and men who had more autonomy in what they were doing economically, but also in terms of these meetings. 7 of the 13 were on some form of benefits or pension, and 6 not. Of the 13 people we interviewed, some had gained access to social housing through homelessness when they had children and had been living in a hostel, but especially in the case of single people, through ill health. And more than half of the 13 people we interviewed did experience ill health, including worries about mental health. And I think this to me, this was very interesting. This was a much higher percentage than we had come across when looking at home-based work in earlier years. The most successful of the businesses was childminding, the second most successful was home tutoring, and the third most successful was an artist who was looking for top-up money, had gone self-employed, and was selling greeting cards in her local neighborhood. The least successful was a man in his 60s who was retired, who borrowed £500 from the Enterprise Club to buy a van to use as a burger bar, and lost the lot within a few weeks. Quite a miserable story of a van in the wrong place that turned out not to have an engine and couldn't be moved to a more reasonable site. And I mean, this is the situation which these people who were struggling really to improve their livelihood were facing. Occupations this includes some double counted occupations. As I say, childminding, home tutoring, catering, selling vintage goods on antiques quotes on eBay, giving legal advice, ironing, and arts-based projects. These income-generating strategies suggest a marked shift in the type of home-based work characteristic of working-class neighborhoods, with the provision of services replacing the home-based manufacturing outlet that was the focus of mine and many earlier studies. However, this list of occupations and the discourse of enterprise, which many of the informants expressed, obscures is how closely their aims related to austerity and the austerity of the benefit system, which we were all experiencing at the time. And this included worries about being pushed off incapacity benefit. In one case, it included cuts in her hours of work, which meant that the law center was a lawyer whose law center was open for less hours, so the clients needed help outside the law center, and she needed hours of work, and so she set up at home to offer advice to people making appeals for the bedroom tax. And it was quite interesting, actually. I mean, Swasti wrote a lot about economic structures and global structures, whereas we found actually that it was actually the benefit system, and that was the most important structures that we were running across. So I'll just end by talking about one particular person. I've chosen her because she did work in the textile industry, or working with textiles and garments, which was Swasti's interest. Eva, I'll call her, is a 35-year-old woman with a small baby, who I think you can just see in front. She's sitting in her living room. She's married to an North African man, and she suffers from depression, often on depression, and she has a bipolar diagnosis. And they attempted to set up, they were on benefit, but they attempted to set up what was actually a very imaginative business. She said that when she had her baby, she wanted clothes and garments and nappy bags and things which reflected the baby's dual heritage. And she couldn't find anything. She said everything was pink. So she designed like changing mats, which had African textiles on one side and British textiles like tartans, Scottish tartans, on the other. So real globalization, in fact, actually. And they were struggling to produce as many of these items as they could, with the idea of taking them to the outdoor markets, which were about in London in the summer. She also had been doing hairdressing at home for a very long time. She was a trained hairdresser. She says that she was the first African-British woman who was employed or trained at Harrods. And the white cabinet, which was from a skip which she redid, is where she kept all her hairdressing materials. A very attractive piece of furniture. So they did the cutting of the items in the living room, and the stitching she did at a small fold-out table in the kitchen. The day after we interviewed Eva and her husband, they had to take their baby to accident and emergency because he had swallowed a pin. And we could see this happening as we sat there, because the health and safety hazards of working in this very contained area with sharp things, it was really quite palpable. Eventually they were moved, this is after we interviewed them, by the Housing Association to a 2-bedroom flat. They had 1 bedroom, but because they had a baby they were entitled to 2. But it turned out that the 2nd bedroom was so ridden with damp that they were unable to use it even for homeworking. So they put this enterprise on the back burner. Her husband was able to get a job. I'm sorry, I'm not able to tell you what it was. And as far as I know, the business has folded. So, I mean, if we take Eva as typical, what we seem to be seeing in this study was not the kind of not the home workers that Jane Tate works with, who are mainly nowadays overseas. but women and men who are very individualized in their situation and thrown onto their own resources, often from a very globalized background themselves, but outside the sort of global commodity chains, as it were, struggling to work in a collective context. So I don't know whether to call this the new precarity. These kinds of informal work have always existed in Britain. I know that. But it seemed in this study that it was a much more important or more numerous form of work than the old garment trade and the outworking garment trade that we used to do.
Thank you, Carol. I think, Carol, the kind of home-based working you've described fits in very well with what we've learned in the Women's Budget Group from our work looking at what's been happening to employment since the so-called recovery, where overwhelmingly the new employment is in self-employment, and a lot of that would be these kind of very wide range of home-based tasks that you were describing, and very much propelled by the deterioration of the welfare state in terms of the inability to rely on a decent access and decent standards from the benefits that we once thought we could rely on. Yeah. Let me invite anybody who would like to contribute to this.
Caroline Sleepen, I've known your work for a long time, and it's lovely to be here and to see so many people I've never met before, whose names were on my master's course list with Ruth. I've been watching the Victorian Slum on BBC Two. I don't know if anyone else has, but actually this is exactly like the 1870s in London. It's splendid. It takes 1 decade per week, and in the 1870s it was people coming fast migration to the slum in London, and it was all own account stuff. The next week, when I've been watching this with my kids, in the 1880s they were starting to take in work as piecework from the factories. So it's quite interesting. It seems that I suppose the analysis is that the factories were a source of that sort of work for a long time, and now we seem somehow to be echoing a pre-factory phase where people are actually generating things absolutely off their own backs. And you know, the Irish immigrant in that episode was taking in laundry, and I see you have ironing services on your list. And yes, I found it's a plus ça change moment, isn't it, in many ways? What's happening. So
it is very interesting. Frances makes quite a lot of the fact that there was a huge amount of outworking in the slums in London, and that when the new modernised housing was built, it was built with the idea of not having housing and not having the dangers and the smells of
yes. And then consequently, the people who most desperately needed to carry on working this way, of course, was one of the reasons that they weren't able to move in. That and the rents and all the rest of it. Yes, fascinating. Thank you.
And I think it also reflects a point that I think Swasti came out of Swasti's work, that we shouldn't think of home-based work as this kind of leftover from the past, that somehow development and modernisation and economic growth would transcend, that it's being recreated in new configurations.
This is more
Thanks
was
to lots of
homeworking,
people, so yeah.
was homeworking forbidden by the landlords of these properties? For example,
They
housing
decided, the coalition government decided to encourage self-employment and home-based work, and to encourage housing providers to permit home-based work in their houses and flats. And this particular provider decided to permit it, and partly with prompting from Frances, sent a postcard to all their tenants saying that they were rescinding the regulations against working at home, and that you are also invited to this project, Open Space Uni, and that was how it started, actually.
Is that also true of council housing?
Well, A lot of the council housing has now been given to housing associations to run, so a lot of this was previously council housing actually.
I can see Maxine.
Well, somebody's mentioned history, so I'm the sort of interloper here. I'm just a historian. But I think it's important to see that the centralized production was never a replacement for what what we call homeworking now, but it continued. They continued together right from the start. When the Industrial Revolution started, and everybody sort of associates with mechanization of spinning, etc. Well, spinning was mechanized to replace fabrics coming in from India, the muslins, Jane Austen's dresses. The workers who'd been spinning at home before that, they are displaced, but many of them were out workers in the countryside, and they are then re-employed to flower the muslin. So they were embroidering on all these fabrics all over these Scottish villages and through Northern Ireland. And everything was kind of connected. There was also handloom weaving going on, continuing to go on much later too, with these factories in the north of England integrating with handloom weavers who were in Bohemia. And so it was very, very interconnected, and the factories just couldn't exist without all these home workers who were continued right through this process, and they had. And another factor that's I think really important in this is it's all the services that provided. So that women could work like this in these spaces, but also in factories. I mean, it's like the food industries. There were more shops in the 18th century, in the middle of the 18th century, than there were in the 1960s. Most of them were little food outlets, and these workers were producing takeaways for these workers in the 18th century. So it's there's not a before and then something else happens after they are
I mean, one of the
integrated
things that
systems.
we found most interesting talking to these people was that we thought about space in terms of the internal space of the
Yes.
but actually it was the neighborhood space that turned out to be extremely important in whether people were able to get their enterprise off the ground. So for a childminder who happened to live next door to a school, that was fantastic in terms of her being able to get children. And in contrast, there was a lady who had tried to set up an ironing service, but the neighborhood was all council housing, so unlike sort of conversions in middle class neighborhoods, you have a ready market. She wasn't able to access that, and she had a ground floor flat which was very vulnerable to theft. And she said, if I start having cash around from doing this ironing service, people will know, and I'll get broken into as well. So the changing neighborhood, I think, is also
Actually, I did homework research in the 80s in my own town, and things haven't changed that much. I'm very happy that you say, that's also what you said, when we started to discuss with homeworks what we want, they didn't want the homework. And so we still have and that's what Swasti said in the film, there's a vast group of workers, men and women, who are excluded of proper labor. And so we now have all, in Holland we call them independents without personnel. So all people who start to work for their own on their own account. And some end up in homework because if you only have few resources, your house is one of the resources and your saving money is the other. And space may help or not, but in fact it's still the same problem as in our research, is that people don't have much alternatives. And I still know when we had our a telephone line for home workers, and so often, mostly people who called and said, do you have homework for me? And then when you asked what the situation was, I often ended up, couldn't you go cleaning? At least you earn more in the hours that you go cleaning. And so this vast majority of people on the lower ranks of the labor market, actually the ones who don't have employment or are in the informal economy. So I think it's very good that there is, because my research is 30 years old, and so is a lot of the work which we all generated around the conventional homework, and later I worked on the convention on domestic work, which was won within a very short period. But still these workers are the ones without protection and will continue to be so. And so it's, I think, I'm very happy to hear of new research, but the ways of action and including it again into what demands should we say, or how Swasti analyzed it. It's not that we have the answers, but we have to make the right analysis and get the right questions. For whom are we working for? And I think that is a part which is very valid for what you are presenting. And I think you need the spirit and the movement which we had, and that at least the fun and the spirit and the networking around it, that would be very helpful to at least to get it on agendas again, because it's the spirit next to some work of continued.
So did you
Just very
draw the
quickly.
session to a close?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you describe that family and having place and then the child in an accident, I remember one of the things in homeworkers worldwide that we often used to quote when we ask people about their experience of homeworking. They'd say, the best thing about homeworking is that I can work and look after my children. And the worst thing about homeworking
Yes.
is I have to work and look after my child. And I think those contradictions, come out very well from your analysis. But also the other thing I think is really interesting is there's a clear kind of class bias in the regulation about this. Because on the one hand there's a bedroom tax. On the other hand, the local authorities say you can use your house to do, own account work. But I mean, which part of your house if you're not even allowed a spare bedroom? And the other thing, of course, is they introduced, I think the coalition government, introduced this measure that if you rented out a spare room, you're allowed to keep, I know, the first 4,000 or whatever is what people do. But if you earn money from, some kind of home basis, you have to declare that and it comes off your benefits. So the class bias of this, at the moment is really clear. The other thing I just wanted to say, when you said that Homeworkers Worldwide was about international homeworking, there was this national homeworking
Yeah, I know very well.
and I can't remember, was it about 5 years ago that they ceased operating? It's
About
actually
that, yeah.
been absorbed into Homeworkers Worldwide. But I remember being at the TUC Congress and Francis O'Grady made this big speech about how important it was and so on, and they knew there was no money, and the TUC wouldn't actually save that organisation, that helpline.
I was involved in the
Yeah, that's
national
right,
group
that's
from the
right.
beginning, actually.
And so it has closed down all the helplines and so on, but I mean, it's still UK, yeah.
So I think just to thank Carol and Sheila for their contributions, so thinking about the links between what Sheila talked about with a lot of focus on organising and the latest evolutions of home-based work that Carol was talking about. And one of the things that strikes me is maybe it's even more difficult now to do organising than it was when we were doing a lot with home-based work that was part of a putting out system, where there was a kind of link to some bigger organisation.
At least you could blame the
That you
employer.
could start, you had ways of trying to put pressure. When it's the individual homework in this very atomised market, then it's a lot harder. And I wondered if you were focusing a lot on place and space, and whether that provides another forum for organising. You can't organise along the lines we're all working eventually. We're told we're self-employed, but actually we're all working on contract for these bigger companies. If that's no longer the case, Uber is a case where you are working for a bigger company, and we can see the fight back against that. But the people you were working with don't seem to be much more individualised. But is the location, is the neighbourhood some basis for organising?
I mean, I can't answer that. I know in New York they've been very successful, and places in America, I don't know if one can actually stay successful in any case. In working on a regular basis. I don't know of anything. I'd be interested.
I think the other thing I'd add to the mix is modern slavery and the kind of element of compulsion that pushes home-based work underground, where you have migrant populations or not. It may be out there, but because there are elements of compulsion and illegality, which may be to do with benefits and migration and immigration status, then it makes it even harder to find out what's actually going on.
So the challenges are still there, in somewhat different formations and combinations, but I think the kind of work that Sheila and what Carol talked about is still a resource on which we can draw. So thank you both very much.
There's tea in the corner of there, so do help yourselves. And anyone who's come in the last little while, there's some programs here, so please do help yourselves. There are a number of Ruskin students who are trying to join us between classes, so hence the kind of movement in and out. But we're all very, very welcome.
Go from behind and go around. Yes, that's a better.
Sorry.
Ben Moody, I am Swasti's son-in-law.
Oh, right, I thought you might be actually.
Of course I'm comparably rich. But I of course, I'm not allowed to call it homework, but my colleagues now see it as a blessing to work from home in the 21st century. A lot of the young women in my team love to work from home, but of course it's a different quality of work, the main different quality of home, and the main difference is we all have choice and options, and so
when I studied homework years ago, it wasn't because people had no involved boxes and all that. No, but when Frances took it up as an architect, she had mostly she had architects and designers, she had academics. She also had people who lived next to them. So what she was really struck with was how much more constrained Council House tenants, and how they were in terms of the capacity of the
I mean, my professional background is very different. I travel extensively in my work. I work a lot for competition authorities. Work in a big accounting firm, so it's a different thing, and I have a global role. So I am on the sunny side of life. I'm frequently in India. I've seen many things in Greece in the last few years where I work. So I always like it sort of the multidisciplinary or faculty element to have inspiration from other sorts. And
no, but it is true people do nowadays if they have, including me, welcome the opportunity, but not usually all the time.
I mean, to be honest, of course, I mentioned I travel a lot. My office is in London. I love to work from Oxford because it's. But we see more and more of that among those who are better off.
The thing is that there is a kind of ideological construct because people say, well, if you or I can't get on, why can't these people use their homes as a resource? And then they end up trying to create, as Diana said, these very
I mean, when you told Eva's story, and was it Eva or Eva the example you used, the African? What a wonderful idea, and what a shame that it went under. But on the other hand, maybe her husband found a decent or halfway decent job. So.
Hello. I had all kinds of questions to ask you.
I don't know your name.
Tony King, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Anthony King. First of all, your empirical results there, where were these examples taken from?
The ones the fresh research.
Yes.
We haven't actually published it.
You haven't?
No, we did the interviews in the summer of 2014. We've given some conference papers, but we haven't.
Right. I mean, my interests are kind of architectural and spatial.
Oh, I see.
And I just wondered whether you published anything. I mean,
Frances has published, it was actually her PhD thesis on working at home with a spatial dimension.
Right.
And that's published.
where
I forget who is the publisher. I could certainly send it to you, but you can just look it up on Amazon.
Yeah.
She's called Frances. I'll write it down for you. It's a beautiful book, because use of space in terms of workspace, home space, shared space.
playing their role, and it's just got bigger and bigger, and they are overwhelming the women who are doing more or less little tasks, and more upright. About it from an economic point of view, so they're probably not, desperately dependent on this income, but it's an interesting phenomenon. The houses themselves changed to accommodate.
The thing is that in this house, two of ours were actually were trying to run from down to the council flat near the city. It's a Georgian house, it's a stunning Georgian house, where it had come into public ownership. It's been it's very trendy. And it had come into public ownership to preserve being a Georgian neighbourhood. And they were trying to run this down from the house, which involved one bedroom, no, it was a one-room flat. So they took all the furniture from the main room, put it in the bathroom, and then one of them lived with the other one in her flat upstairs, so that there was a ground floor, access to the outdoors. I do have pictures also on the other side of the house. With people standing drinking wine outside the flat. They actually exhibited one of the so they were quiet, but in the end they gave it up because it was just much impossible in that group to do. There is that as well. Injury to children.
Yes. I mean, where was this?
Probably the Tower Hamlets or this particular.
And I mean, the way these developments are also. I mean, they have also kind of enclosed the space that was outside, and the way that people in these 1930s houses have garage space, that the garage has been developed, and people are living
Well, you must look at her book.
I will. Anyway, many thanks. Fascinating.
And then the summer in the summer, it's a beautiful place to work. Oh, right, okay.
I stay a little bit over there, but not so.
No, but the cafe you can come in any time.
Is it open for everybody?
And it's open on Sundays, yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Well, I've worked here for 16 years.
I didn't realize that.
No. We want local people using the cafe. This is how we make a connection with because some of the sites are owned by people in Kennington Village. So at the weekend we encourage the public to come in. Go around the grounds and have something to eat in the cafe.
Oh, that is very good. Because I always thought that you have to be a member.
And you know when they have the Oxford opening, we're also open now.
Yeah, but that day I have to avoid. I felt that's very to see the list.
Yeah.
If you really want to see it, they come when it is not open. But it's a good idea. Oh yes, I didn't know that. I'll tell my husband. We both live in, we are living in Water Lane for last 20 years.
Oh right, okay.
And so all the time we saw the development here.
Temperature down, Mr. Campbell.
Oh, it was very hot.
Everyone's very
Say something to Tim who's the head chef.
I've heard nothing but praise.
We're very happy to hear that.
Yeah. happening. Now I realise what's happening. That's the new building. Yes, I haven't seen it. I live very nearby, but the real government also from upstairs we don't see it.
We're looking at the new housing complex
That's the housing complex.
No, I see. Yes, yes. Progress. Progress.
That is the whole area we're in. Barton Park is a good idea to have.
Well, there's no doubt there is a housing shortage.
Well, quite a shortage, yes. Never mind.
Not in my backyard.
Oh, well.
No, I have to put on it. But there's other things which are not
I think